They are with us. Good evening, everyone. My name is Abayo Chamika Tisdale. I'm the programming assistant at Charis Circle, which is the programming arm of Charis Books and More, the South's oldest feminist bookstore. And we are so honored to be here tonight to celebrate Eliana Ramage's To the Moon and Back. So tonight we have our very own E.R. Anderson, who is the executive director at Charis Circle, who will be in conversation with Eliana. ER manages the programming, fiscal, and daily operations of Care Circle and is always interested in the ways that our communities can share skills and resources. As a native Atlantan, ER came to Caris as one of the founding members of the Young Writers Group in 1997 and has enjoyed helping build connections between communities of activists, artists, and academics in this city ever since. ER co facilitates the Gender Creative Parenting Collective and our Trans and Friends groups, and when not with Charis, ER is working on a novel and let God sort them out. And the person of the hour, Eliana Ramage. Eliana holds an MFA in fiction from the Iowa Writers Workshop. She has received residencies and fellowships from the Kimmel Harding Nelson Center, Lambda Literary, Tin House, and the Vermont Studio Center. A citizen of the Cherokee Nation, she lives in Nashville with her family. To the Moon and Back is her first novel. Before I pass the mic over to ER, one reminder is that there'll be a Q&A after, so keep your questions in mind. And people joining us virtually, please put them in the chat and I will read them out loud when we get to that portion of the evening. And over to you, ER.
All right. Oop, we gotta turn it down. Maybe turn it down just a touch. Okay, yeah. But turn them both down more and turn yours off, Abea. This is Abea's first time getting to do this, so give them a round of applause. Yes, thank you, Abea. Thank you all so much for being here. This is really exciting. So Eliana and I know each other from an online writing class in 2021, and one of our fellow writing class folks is here with us all the way from Florida. And it is a joy. It's always a joy at Charis to get to celebrate friends' books. It's always a joy at Charis to get to celebrate debut author books because I feel like you are birthing something into the world that deserves, to be feted over and over again. But it is really exciting when something is good. I would just say when it's good on all of these levels, right? Like this is it's a relief to read a friend's book and be like, oh my God, this is really good. And y'all, this book is really good. And if you haven't started reading it yet, you're going to start reading it and then you're going to just blaze through it because you're not going to want to stop reading about these women. So I thought maybe you might start us off with a little reading and just contextualize a little bit about Steph and all of her many people.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to give you too much context for the whole book yet, but what you should know from this section is that Steph, she's an aspiring astronaut. And for this section, you need to know that she's gay and that she's in high school. The students have written a play. It's about the Trail of Tears. And the play is accidentally ridiculous. It's also earnest. It's okay to laugh. No boys, believe it or not, no boys auditioned for this play. There is a marriage at the heart of this play. So Steph has to play the part of the husband of her big crush. When we were on the trail together, I took care of Meredith. Her chest was in constant movement, her breaths deep and labored. She acted her heart out, the bundled up red-haired American Girl doll that was our baby pressed against the many shining buttons of her shirt. In the second act, I broke the neck of a mockingbird with my bare hands, which was a metaphor because you're not supposed to kill them, and I gave the whole thing to Meredith to eat. In turn, Meredith did whatever she could for our children. Our two oldest, twins, died in the stockades in Georgia. Our third child died of scarlet fever in Alabama. When a soldier in Tennessee threatened to shoot our crying baby, Meredith accidentally smothered it. After we buried it, just past intermission, Meredith blocked the whole third act so that her head lay against my chest as we walked. She had chosen that, not the drama teacher. It's possible she loves you, I told myself. I bought a chicken sandwich from Chick-fil-A and zipped it into the outside pocket of her backpack after our second performance. No note. It wasn't a mockingbird, but it was something. At the end of the trail, when our once rowdy family had been reduced to the two of us, I took my first steps into Indian territory with an inconsolable Meredith in my arms. She sobbed real tears all 3 nights in our school auditorium and grasped at my chest and my tattered collar as I held her like the baby she had accidentally smothered. After each performance, Meredith would kiss me, the first 3 kisses of my life. Each kiss was longer than the kiss the night before. The two of us were wrapped in the heavy black cloth of a backstage curtain like a burrito, while the audience waited for us outside. On the third night, she took my hand in hers and pulled it under her mud-crusted trade shirt, under her bra even, and made the softest sound in the back of her throat, and I thought I'd die to hear it again. I thought this is the meaning of life, making someone make a sound like that. Everything I'd done before this had been a waste. And then she left to collect her bouquet of grocery store flowers from fucking Daniel. I felt downtrodden, like I'd just watched my children all die one by one before my wife ran off with someone else. Hadn't we been a team? Meredith and I were like the only survivors in a world of regular people. Who could understand the horrors we had seen? After the play, when we were back in high school, barely spoke to each other, except for times like when I, for example, dropped my most sophisticated choice of book on the floor in front of her so she'd stop walking and get down on her knees and hand it back to me. It was like the anguish of our shared past had ruined us, and now we were divorced. I tried to talk about it with her once. We were worth talking about. We were breaking down the sets. When Meredith reached for a hammer, I reached for it too and held my hand so gently over hers. I looked at her with the saddest eyes I could muster. Eyes like, did you love me? Do you? Will you again? Will anyone? Meredith laughed and let go of the hammer. You can have it. I'll go do props. Like that was what I wanted from her. A hammer. I'll miss you, I whispered, with play over and all. She was supposed to say she'd miss me too. Then we'd kiss. I had it planned all out in my head. She said, yeah, it was fun. Maybe she didn't realize the chicken sandwich had been from me. Maybe she didn't get that a chicken was like a bird, which was like a mockingbird, which was a metaphor. I would kill all kinds of animals for her, not just birds, if she ever needed me to. I tried again, even quieter, though everyone else was working backstage and being loud. I like you a lot, I said. Might I take you to Chick-fil-A sometime? Meredith looked stricken. Or, to somewhere you pick. Somewhere more expensive. I have $20. It was already a compromise, a far cry from making out. But it took years to get to the moon landing. Some people worked toward it for so long that by the time it happened, they were dead.
I'm very glad that you read that part because that's the moment when I fell in love with Steph's voice because I laughed out loud multiple times. And so let's maybe start by talking about your humor because this book I think has been talked about in the press as like very serious and important and
it is very serious and very, very important.
Yes, which is great. It's great to have written an important book, but this book is very funny throughout. So you're a funny person. I just know in your regular life, and a playful person, and that comes through in all of the characters. But I wonder, did you, as you were writing, how did you think about the role of humor?
I thought about it as my favorite thing in real life that was like forbidden in literary fiction, which is not true. Lots of people do it all the time and are very good at it. But I think when I started writing in general, which is kind of also when I started writing this book, it was like, oh, this thing that is like so much a part of you and what you love in like normal world isn't supposed to be in literary fiction if you're talking about things that like matter and you want your book to matter. So I'm glad that it took 12 years because it was, I mean, many things changed in the way I understood writing in those years, but one of the things that changed was realizing how like important and special it was to me to get to not feel like I had to meet this arbitrary rule that of course is not real and not true, and have characters who care about the things that I think are part of life.
Yeah, there's what I think of very much as like sibling humor and sister humor in this book. The ways that your siblings can needle you that like no one else can. And I know you have siblings. Did you that humor is a kind of intimacy, right? Like that is what came up over and over again. If like there's a moment in the book after someone dies and sort of what breaks through the sadness is the first time that the other characters who are mourning this person can make fun of her, right? And that made me think like, oh, you know, like that is a way that we care for each other even in death, right? It's like, oh, right, like it's getting back to normal and not you know making light of a death, but it's like, oh, right, this is how we continue to connect with this now ancestor. And so I also think there's, you know, this kind of polarized tradition in Native literature and how people talk about Native literature as either like, again, deadly serious or very funny, right? And there's kind of two poles. And I think, you know, anytime you are one is writing as you know, like the way that the publishing industry commodifies people's identities, right? It's like you are working within those traditions whether you want to or not. And so I'm also curious kind of how you thought about that within these polarized traditions of how people talk about Native art.
I think that I haven't, of course, what you're saying, like you're part of it, even if you don't realize, you're absolutely right. I also think that I stopped thinking about it in that way in maybe 2014 or so. That's again part of why I'm glad that it took a long time to write, because the particular tradition that I not even including humor, like the particular tradition that I felt like maybe I needed to be doing was in college. There were a lot of like traditional, like Cherokee traditional stories that I was retelling, and that's a cool thing. Nothing against it, absolutely at all. It also just wasn't what I was interested in. And what a thing to learn, that you should write about the things that you're interested in and the things that you connect to. And it was, I think, powerful to me to watch this really messy TV show at the time that changed things for me. It was it's called Mohawk Girls. It's a Canadian show that came out, I think, 2013, 2014, and it was billed as like Mohawk Sex in the City. It's a real, again, like a very silly show. You've got these Mohawk women who live in a small town, and they like all they do is like sleep with the wrong people and like destroy their friendships. But like they were navigating a similar, you know, today world that I was navigating, and it felt like my first example of like, oh, you really can do anything you want.
Yeah, the police are not coming to take
They're not
away
going to
your
come
right or
get
wrong.
you.
Yeah, I love that, and I think you know, the thing that really struck me in, you know, enjoying this book is just the playfulness also of the construction of it, right? And even my sort of habit is to hate read Goodreads reviews. I don't know if you've read any of your Goodreads reviews. They're overwhelmingly positive, as they should be. Every once in a while, you know, I'm like, oh, this like Karen from Illinois was like, well, it's too complex, right? Like, why are there emails in here? Why is there and I'm like, this dumb, you know, but it's interesting to me to see the places where readers bump against things and to ask why, you know, and to be like, is that bump useful, or is it like, is it a failure of their imagination, or is it a failure of the authors, right? And so, of course, in this case, I think it's a failure of these readers' imagination. But what you do in this book, I think that some people bumped on because they had maybe never seen it before, is the point of view shifts multiple times, and we do begin to get Instagram posts, and we do begin to get emails, and we get these different kind of transmissions at various points. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the structure and kind of how you, if it was always that way, or if you began to incorporate different kinds of texts in later revisions.
It was not always this way, which is, I feel like that's a whole nother bigger question about like what was this novel before it was this novel. But if we just talk about the point of view thing, I had this experience where I was trying to maybe keep it. A lot of writing this novel was like, oh, could I make this a little more straightforward? Could I make this a little simpler? And I had this experience where I thought, okay, well, just for fun, let's have an exercise where I think of how Steph, our main character, would describe herself through a decade of Tinder posts. And it was fun. And I also realized immediately after doing it that 10 years of actually Instagram too, but 10 years of Tinder posts is like Tinder profiles is 10 years of how you're hoping that the world will perceive you and like you. And once I realized that, it was so clear that Steph's sister, Kayla, is a native artist slash activist slash social media influencer. She's someone who is really, really, really like obsessed with and defined by how people perceive her, particularly as a Native woman. And the same can be said of Steph's mother, who is coming from a particular context where it really matters not who Cherokee people are today, but who they have been understood to be in the past, and how close or how far is she from that story. So if these are the characters you're dealing with, and we have plenty of others, or this book is all Cherokee women being Cherokee in different ways, then the way that they understand themselves to be perceived and the way they hope other people to perceive them is central to what's going on. Once you know that, then you know, or at least I knew, that I wanted to have a chance for them to speak for themselves. I wanted to see what their Instagram posts would be and their texts, and like all of these characters should have an opportunity to show how they hope a potential reader would understand them.
Yeah, I love that. And I think you know, so often in books there's this like one totalizing narrative, and it sort of smashes or flattens the way that the reader can engage with characters. And I think to me it was a really amazing example of form matching content, and that these characters are not flattened. They're allowed to be messy, they're allowed to be funny, they're allowed to be um you know, troubled in various ways, and to keep coming back to each other. And one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is how we show the values, like what are the values that we want to explain to people who are not from our culture, right? And one of the ways that I think this book does that is by allowing people to be themselves, right? And then also sort of how, what values do you want to leave with the reader, right? Like what's the ending message? It's like, what do you want them to take away? So as you were kind of thinking about the values that you wanted to transmit, it's, you know, I mean, some of them were like, obviously let Cherokee women be complex and you know, multifaceted in all these ways. But what were some of the ways that you kind of were thinking about that?
I think that was a big part of the revision process, because I just keep saying this all over and over again. It took a long time to write this, and I was changing the way I understood these characters and these ideas over those years. And I was really afraid of being heavy-handed, and you know, like being preachy, so much so that in all the different iterations of the book, by the time it got to Margot, its editor in the US, she said at one point, like, what does this book mean? And I was terrified when she said that. I was like, oh God, like I've written a book that means nothing. What am I gonna do? Why did you even buy it? And then it was I talked to her again, and it was immediately apparent that like it does mean something, and she knew what it meant, and what she was trying to say to me was that, you know, because I had been afraid of being heavy-handed, I at that point in the revisions had not been hospitable to the audience. You don't want to write too much towards any audience, especially a broad audience that isn't going to understand everything that you're trying to do. But I think there was a point at which I was so afraid of that I wasn't being hospitable enough. So I think being asked that question when I was asked at the very end was really wonderful, because it meant that I got to feel all this freedom to say, okay, we have all these different characters. They understand the world in very different ways, and that's okay. And they're living that out without much regard in my mind for the audience. Last draft, how can we trust ourselves to not be heavy handed and bring in that clarity?
That's beautiful, and I'm glad that you found an editor that knew to ask you that question.
She's pretty great.
That's great. One of the things that I think modern fiction does not do well is talk earnestly about protest. In general, like usually when I read about people leftists protesting in novels, I'm like, this is not how we do it. This is not real. Like, what is happening? Or the satire feels so broad that I'm like, get out of here. But one of the things that I really enjoyed was there is a bit of humor and poking fun at some of the, particularly like the social media aspects of contemporary protest, but also in the sort of meaning making that people do around attaching themselves to movements. But there's also the earnest part of it, and the earnest part of it is deep and real. And so, you know, you're right. As you said, you've been working on this book for 12 years. All of these social movements have been happening through you're living alongside all these things. And so I know for myself as a writer, like I'm always struggling to kind of be like, well, God, now this happened and now I want to like pull this in. But particularly like in Native activism, like Standing Rock happened, and the Mauna Loa protest was the real one, right? Yes. And you know, other protests happened that have become more visible because of social media, right? And so how did you think about protest as you were writing the book, and how did you sort of shift as like stuff's popping off all the time?
Well, the thing that resonates the most is just having, you know, like all of us, like lived through the last decade, getting, you know, not just in real life, but also on the internet, and getting to experience like what is it that we're saying, and watching people, you know, do that well and do that not well, and apologize not well. And so just sort of swimming in that ocean, like not even as much of like an online participant, but someone who observes, as writers do, was helpful. But when it came to how to write about these particular protests, I feel like I don't know what I would do if I were doing this. If I were to write about a real protest in the future, that would be a question I would really have to sit with, because for this book, it felt pretty immediately obvious to me that the work was so important, and it was something I respect so much, even when it's done well and not done well, that I didn't want to make fun of the real work. So Standing Rock, very, very, very meaningful, like to me, when I got to go in grad school when I was working on this book. And that's a protest that is like mentioned in this book. It's a protest that was an inspiration to some of the characters in this book. But it's not something we don't like go to Standing Rock with the characters and experience that, versus the protest that happens in Hawaii, we're talking about, we again are talking about one that is real, and we're really experiencing one that is not real. And so having that line between real and not real let me think through these issues without, I just, I think it also might have felt, and this is why I'm curious about what I would do next time. I think that if I were to set a book at a real protest, then it would change everything. I would, how do you, people do it all the time and they do a great job, but like, how would I, okay, I would not feel confident writing a first novel to say like, I am going to really do what needs to be done, like look directly at something and represent it when it's not just mine. It's shared by people who really, really care.
Yeah, I think that's a really wise choice, and also the way that you do family and genealogy in this book is sort of similar. So,
Yeah.
You want to talk a little bit about sort of, you have a great, the end notes of this book are very good in terms of being really informative and helpful. But do you want to talk about sort of how you handle specifically the moment at which you stop referring to real life ancestors and sort of switch over?
Well, the context for why we're even talking about real life ancestors is because my brother is a Cherokee historian. And that is really lucky when you're writing a book like this. He has, of course, so much like depth of knowledge and like literal, archive access and like knowing how to use a microfiche that I did not have. So I had a lot of conversations with him, and he looked over many of the drafts over the years. First off, to just give me an understanding of like Cherokee families and Cherokee families like ours, like white Cherokee families like ours. And so that was one thing, just like those complicated conversations. But then when it got more specific, I didn't want to talk about hard things and have them be like, oh, well, it's not real. I wanted to be able to be specific. So my brother took me to the archives when he was doing a fellowship in Oklahoma, and he helped me like find direct quotes from ancestors of ours. And in terms of when to stop, I stopped at the year 1860 because I wanted to be able to, throughout the work of the novel, be very, very clear about, when these people have been gone for this long, when they are ancestors who are shared by many, many, many people. This is not just like my great great whatever. Those people, we can say like, look at this person and look what they did. I know I'm speaking vaguely, but just for an example, one of my ancestors was a signer of the treaty that led to the Trail of Tears. So up until 1860, real people. Anyone in the book who was born after 1860 is fictional. I don't want, especially these are shared ancestors, I don't want someone to be like, you talked about my grandfather. You talked about him as like a complex character, as we all are.
Yeah, I thought that was so smart. And I'm looking at this from like a problem solving perspective. Always like when I read, I'm like, oh, like that's a great way to handle that, right? Because people do get very upset, right? And particularly when we're trying to talk about the ways in which America is so broken, right?
Yeah.
And like this is why, and here, and you have characters who are wrestling with the impact of that brokenness on them, and their investment in a certain form of legacy that maybe isn't as honest as they thought it was, right? Or that is as beautiful as they had hoped it was. Yes. Which I think is a very relatable story for a lot of people in the United States, right? There's a lot of people who look to ancestors as like, oh, well, maybe like back then, like somebody was doing something good.
If we can just return to that, right. And then like when these characters are really like doing work and trying to like return to that idea, then like we have to think about who was on the Trail of Tears. Many, many Cherokee people, also people who were enslaved by Cherokees, were on the Trail of Tears. Like that, if I didn't want to talk about the Trail of Tears or this family several generations later without that being part of the story.
Yeah. And I think it's really, helpful to be able to know when you need to buy yourself the freedom to tell the story that you want to tell. And so both with the protest and with family, being able to say like, okay, this is the point at which we're gonna switch over. Like, I need you to know the real context, and I need you to know like this is real, and I want to be able to put my mark on it. So I thought those were two really good choices that you made in this book, and I really appreciated them. So we haven't talked about space yet at all. You know, I think that this book, there's another space novel that came out earlier this year. Space lesbian novel, which is funny. I've not read it.
It was an incredible time for space lesbians.
I know, who knew? And apparently also space lesbian, there's some crime happening in real life space lesbians. I don't know if you know. I just read an article.
What happened?
I don't want to talk out of turn, so because I don't know all the details. But literally, there was a woman who is in space who has done some maybe fraud, maybe some embezzlement, unclear. I'm gonna see. I don't know the details. I shouldn't
even say. 2028, the embezzlement lesbian astronaut novel.
Yeah. So, you know, I think people are very hooked by the space part of this, right? Like that's people are like, oh, space, you know. What was the draw for you when you were, you know, thinking about Steph and being an astronaut? I mean, it is a uniquely driven profession, right? And that's such a big part of her character, and obviously it's the furthest away from home you can get,
which is a metaphor.
Yes. But yeah, so tell us about space.
Space moment, like when this became not when this became, a few years before this became a space novel, but when I first thought of this was when I was in college. So I was in a conversation with a bunch of fellow college students. We were all from different tribal nations. Kind of out of nowhere, this sophomore said, you know, if one of you were to become an astronaut, that too would be part of the story of your people. And that was an idea that was new to me. It was definitely an image that was new to me. It was really specific. It kind of stopped time. It threw me into the future. Once he said that, I realized that our whole conversation up until then, we had all as a group been talking about our people like through the lens of history. When you do that, there's of course this like narrative of loss. Like we were like X, and then each generation, it's like how much of us, you know, is no longer there. And once I had this idea of a Cherokee astronaut in mind, go a little further, you can think about Cherokees on Mars. What does it even mean that there are Cherokees on Mars? What are the stories that they're going to tell? What are the stories that we're going to tell about them or about ourselves? I think it like opened up optimism and possibility at a time when like I had just left my parents' house. So I was thinking like, what is it going to look like for me to live my life as a like new Cherokee adult in primarily non-Cherokee spaces? And just kept thinking about these space people, even though it's like the last place I would ever go.
I was going to ask, like, were you a NASA kid? Were you like a kid that was like obsessed with watching any of that stuff?
I was a Star Trek kid only because A, my brothers watched it, so I did it together to fit in, but B, optimism. So I'm like, I spiritually love Star Trek, but like, don't make me go to space.
I had when I was teaching, you know, young Gen Zers, I was very thrown off because I assumed that they understood space inherently as an optimistic metaphor.
Yeah, that's what it is.
And they did not. I was like, not at all. Because I was trying to teach them River Solomon's book, which is about a slave ship in space. And they were like, yeah, what? Yeah. And I was like, no, but this is, they're pushing against like, you know, retrofuturism and space as this optimistic frontier and, you know, the mid-century and all. And they were like, seems normal to me.
Like the space seems normal.
It's like space would be terrible too. And I was like, oh God, we have really done a number on these guys.
If we can't be optimistic in space, where can
I'm just saying it's hard out here for the youth. And so I liked that. I liked the optimistic part of this book, and that space was optimistic. Even as Steph is a character who is not like, a happy-go-lucky kind of person, but her drive is an optimistic drive.
Yes,
which I think is interesting. Do you want to talk a little bit about what it means to write a person who is self-motivated and self-interested? I'm trying to
I feel like you're trying to say selfish because she is.
Well, because I think that selfish is is a bad word, and I don't think she's like bad. I think she's a great character. I think she is a person that I would want to know. Like, I think some people are like, "Ooh, I can't relate to her," and I was like, "I can." I get it. I'm not like her, but I get her. I get, and so, do you want to share a little bit about kind of how you thought about her drive and her ambition and what that meant? Because it does also go very much against sort of at least the stereotypical Cherokee values around communal care and all those things. Like, she's like, nope, no, I don't have time for y'all.
Yeah, I think that she understands these communal values that her mom has, that her sisters have, that like all the people around her have. She understands those as confining, and they are confining in the story of Cherokee, like just in the story of Cherokee people that her mom and her sister are telling. Her mom and her sister have this narrative of loss, of like, we have lost almost everything, and if you leave this land, or if you leave this language, or if you leave any of this, then we're basically already gone. This stuff needs to be protected, and it does need to be protected. Thank God there's more than one way to be Cherokee. But I think that Steph just has she has such a clear idea of what she wants, and that wouldn't be too much of an issue if it weren't for the fact that it's a coming of age novel. She does not show up like, fully formed. She needs to go through this process of like, can more than one thing matter, even in when your dream is the kind of dream that like almost no one actually gets to live out unless they are like fully devoted in a way that you doesn't make room for other things.
Yeah. I want to open it up for audience questions. We may have stuff online, but also the folks here in the room with us. Abea's going to come around with a microphone if you'll raise your hand.
This is an amazing book. I absolutely loved it, and there's so much to talk about it. But I wonder, something that you hadn't mentioned that I'm interested in, it sort of ties in a little bit to this idea about the different narrators and voices in the book. It's clearly Steph's book because she speaks, and it's her voice and her Tinder and all of that, and her dream and her drive through most of the book. But you also made the choice to have a few chapters sprinkled through the book where other characters speak. And I'm particularly interested in the character of Della, who's Steph's love in college. And there are some scenes with Della in the book. I don't want to give anything away, except I literally gasped out loud at moments in where she goes to the bottom of the ocean. And I wonder, just sort of in terms of looking at the character of Della in contrast to Steph, she's very different from Steph. And why you felt, or talk through your process of feeling as though Della needs to have a voice in this book, and maybe a little bit about also the metaphor of her at the bottom of the ocean while Steph is in the top of the world, where she's in space, I guess.
Yeah.
So just a little bit about that, which I thought was interesting.
Della's my favorite. Sorry.
Yeah,
we should get far away from each other. Della's my favorite character. she has signed up for for this value of we look out for each other. It's not just my passion, it's all of us together. Really admire that in her, love that in her. Also, part of why she's done that is because her community has been taken from her. She was raised in the midst of a Supreme Court case from an adoptive couple ignoring the Indian Child Welfare Act. So from a very, very young age, she's had her story told for her. And it means that when we meet her in college in a Native Student Association, it's like her first chance away from home to maybe try to reclaim what was taken from her. And she's realizing that because all of this was so public, these questions that the book has about who's telling what story and why, and what stories do we pass on and what stories we don't, that work has happened for her already. And how do you tell your story in that like sea of other stories? But in terms of the ocean thing, Della came to love oceanography. She came to love science in part like many years into the writing because I realized that she like didn't have a passion. I didn't want it to be this binary of like you've got one character who's very driven and like she loves something, therefore she like can't think or care about other people, and then you have another character, this like huge sweetheart, who does think about other people, therefore she can't have anything um that is like just hers. So in later drafts, it came to be like really meaningful to me as someone who like cares about her to see that she does find like parts of the world that are just for her.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. Oh God. Hello. Does this work better? This is so awkward. No. Well, I just want to say congratulations, first of all, on the release of your book. That must have been insane to get it out there, like all that effort and work. As an artist, I understand that. That's pretty good. I want to do a quick shout out. I liked the concept of a space that you said that's in your book. Like, that's cool that's in it, but I like the conversation you guys had about like the optimism that comes from space. I never thought about that. Like I read Parable of the Sour, and I think they were talking about like space in an optimistic way, and I was like, I never thought about that. But when you said it, I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. But the question I had for you actually was, as a writer, who are some of your writing heroes? I don't think if you have, yeah.
Oh man, where do I? Okay, well, chronological order. When the first time I read a book by a native writer and I was like aware that that's what I was doing was in high school. It was The Painted Drum by Louise Erdrich. And what I love about that story is that after I finished reading it, I was like just at the perfect age um to like finally get like not just like wonderful really cool plot, but like to actually understand like, oh, there's a difference in how one chooses to tell the story, and like this is artful and I want to do this and this is so cool, I'm moved by this. So that was just such like an aha moment. And like a year later I felt that with Anne Patchett. I felt that with so many different writers, and now I feel that every week. Like it's, I think partly that I read more, partly just that there's so many incredible books that are coming out. Thank you.
I was going to ask what books do you think your book is actively in conversation with? So, sort of more your peer books or the books that you're kind of speaking to, or kind of maybe even speaking back at.
Ooh. Well, one that I read while writing this was Girl, Woman, Other by Bernadine Evaristo. And I was looking at you because I couldn't remember if we read it at the same time. And I think we read it at the same time in the pandemic. Okay, for the online people, I was talking to my friend. Sorry. And another book was I've forgotten everything I've ever read. Sorry? Nantucket. I don't think I've ever read. Okay. Actually, so yes, you're right. That's not the name of the book. What happened is there's a book that came out in July by Joseph Lee.
Okay.
And it's called
the book that you're talking about.
Oh my God. Sorry, I should memorize.
No, but I know. Yes. So yes, he is. He's from Martha's Vineyard and from Aquinnah on Martha's Vineyard. Yeah.
So he's an Aquinnah nonfiction writer who just came out with his debut nonfiction book. It's very, very good. And what was cool about it is that, well, one of the things that's cool about it is that the characters in not characters, it's nonfiction. In each chapter, he is engaging like directly in it as a journalist with the questions that are asked by the characters in my book. He's going around the world and talking to Indigenous people, like in the US, in Canada, in the Amazon, like all of these different places, and talking about the things that these characters are interested in about, issues of, who is Indigenous and how does enrollment work? And, if your enrollment works like X, then like, what would that mean in terms of your political power or your identity in 100 years? Like, these are things that the book is interested in and I'm interested in, but because it's nonfiction, because mine is fiction, I don't want to like pause the narrative and like give 20 pages of like nonfiction context. When I finished this book and I read his, it just felt incredible to be like not just living in a time as someone who's interested in those questions, but like writing in a time where in the same summer you could engage with these questions in a similar way.
I love that. Any other questions? Yep. Baya's gonna bring it to you.
I guess we're probably gonna need to go up. Oh, maybe not.
Did it. I think it means your bark's not.
Oh, got it. So I have a question about the timing of you writing this book. So you mentioned that you wrote it over the course of like 10 to 12 years. Is that what you had said?
That is what I said.
Wow. So did you only write this for that amount of time? Did you take breaks? Like what was
Great
the
question.
process? I mean, I'm sure there's a very long answer and a more succinct answer, but in terms of coming back to it, were you writing anything else? Like what was that like as a writer?
Yeah, I was definitely writing other things. 3 people in the room have read different versions of what I was writing. I started this 12 years ago. And when I say I started this, I mean I started what I think of as like proto To the Moon and Backs. Instead of saying, oh, there was like this narrative as draft 1 and I did this narrative like just revising. I just kept trying. I started with this, but I kept trying simpler versions of it, what I hoped would be simpler versions. To give 3 examples, there was a book where our aspiring astronaut, Steph, her book, but she doesn't want to go to space. No space Steph. We have a version where her girlfriend, Della, is in the book, but there's no Steph. So it's just about Della to like age 60. There's a version where Steph and Della are both in the book and they are in love, but it's set 200 years in the future, very unsuccessfully. So I kept trying to take some of the thing. This has like many characters and many narratives and many years, and I kept trying to like take things out to like try to like cheat my way into this being an easy experience. And it turned out again, like you have to write what you're interested in. There is no easy way to write a book, especially if you're trying to avoid the book that like you want to do but you're just struggling with. So I stopped writing for 2 years and I and the pandemic happened, and my friend Angela said, like, we all have virtual jobs. It's the pandemic. Do you want to join 4 a.m. club? Which is where we would text each other. The 4 a.m. part was short lived, but we would text each other at 4 a.m. like photos of ourselves, like writing. And that was when it felt like whether or not this is like a publishable thing, this is a thing that I want to do. This is a thing that, like, Angela is doing what like the work that's important to her. Like, if we could just like together finish something that we're proud of, especially after my 2 years of not writing and not feeling proud of what I was doing in writing, I felt like that would be really meaningful to me, and it has been. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Wow. Do you think that was it you that pulled together kind of the pieces of all of the sort of books, narratives, stories that you had for the characters, or was that accompanied by like an editor or some like a publisher, somebody else who was sort of helping you dictate what they thought was sellable? Or
So it was always this, where I would take breaks to try to do things like, what what some people have read, these other versions, but it was generally always this. And then when I queried, it was this. But had you read it at the time, it would have been just a much worse version of this, because the agent and the editor did so much. But if I could just sum it up, then the agent, Meredith Kappel Simonoff, she took this book that at that point was so not cohesive. It was all of this, but not cohesive, that the answer could have been like, oh, cut out the second half, something like that. And instead, she said, let's go in together and help kind of help me understand and see how I could bring it together, as the ambitious version, the version I wanted it to be. And then when it sold, Margot Schickmanter, the US editor, and Bobby Mastanoan, the UK editor, they did many things. One of the things they did was like give me permission to be funny. And the other thing they did, one of them, was help me reintroduce the idea of an audience. And that's where it's like, okay, like, let's work on our pacing. Let's like go. Let's make this like my home, a place I want people to feel comfortable, even if they're being challenged, like, and let them still feel like they can walk around in it. Thank you.
Eliana, congratulations.
Thank you.
Super exciting, super thrilling. I remember you from class as being an optimist and a believer. I always kind of showed up jaded, and I remember your affectation in class very clearly. You were always on everybody's side and on the side of everybody's books, and you were a believer, and you were excited to be there. And it was a great corrective to my own presence, and so I really appreciated it. I was going to ask a little bit about process, and I'm super interested in like mistakes and errors. I think everyone always asks about good things, but you spoke to that a little bit. I'm also interested in like, what's it been like? You're like, this is going really well for you as far as I can tell from the outside. And like, what does that feel like after 12 years of working?
It feels really, really good.
Yeah, that's great.
So good.
That's great.
Yeah, and what feels good about it are two things, and I think they're on the level, like, I'm putting them in the hierarchy that I want them to be in, so that they are for me. So the first thing that feels good is that when I had stopped writing, my life had gone in an unexpected place. It had gone into a painful place. It had gone into a place where I was like, well, like, let's stop. Not just let's stop writing this book. Let's stop writing. And so when the goal shifted from publishing to like, I just want to feel like I can go back to this thing that I love, and I just want to feel like I can be proud of myself for finishing the version that I want this to be. So that's just what I keep. I think about that like every day lately. And the second thing that feels good is how how many people are involved. So much of writing, as like we all know, so much of writing is the time that we spend alone at a desk, and like the belief part is really, really hard. Again, so hard that I stopped. And so now that it's out, like I'm just always thinking about, 4 a.m. Club makes me think of the friends who are involved. Like getting to be at a reading like this makes me think about like people who were in class with me, like you two, and like family that's here, and like watching the baby, while I do this event, the agent and the editors and just booksellers. Like I now walk into a bookstore and have like just a much better understanding behind every book of, oh, like I thought it was the work that you do alone, but even before publishing, it's not. And that's my favorite part about it. Thank you.
That's smart. I think that's a beautiful place to transition to our book signing portion. So, Abeo, do you want to take us into that?
We're back on. All right. Sarah's up front with books for you guys to buy. Eliana is here to sign them. Folks online, you can press the teal button at the bottom of your screen to get the book on our website. Thank you guys for coming out. This was such a lovely conversation.
Thank you so much.